Is it possible to become a hero even if I don't have a quirk?
Well, according to the first 2 seasons, the answer is no. I love the first chapter of My Hero Academia. Specifically, I love the first 2 episodes of the anime which adapts the first chapter of My Hero Academia. I am about as excited to rewatching those 2 episodes as young Izuku Midori is to rewatching the same video clip of his favorite superhero over and over again. I like the main character. Izuku Midoriya is extremely likable. I like the world he lives in. It is just bizarre enough to light up my imagination, but also feels familiar enough in a good way to not alienate newcomers. And yet, despite the fantastic setting, the obstacles that face Midoriya are very specific, very familiar, and very human. In a world where 80% of the human race has become dominated by the superhuman race, those who have superpowers, or quirks, are members of the majority. Those without quirks are mathematically and metaphorically the minority. And weak little Deku is a part of that minority. In fact, we see him go to a doctor. He gets an official diagnosis, and according to his doctor, he will never gain a quirk. He will never become a member of the majority.
Here's the sad truth. All men are not created equal.
And that is where the emotional core of this story lies. Izuku Midoriya is different. In a world of the super, he is not normal. He is abnormal. While everyone else has an advantage through their amazing abilities, Izuku Midoriya has a disadvantage, a lack of ability, a handicap. But in spite of his diagnosis, in spite of his classmates, in spite of his own mother, he marches on, meticulously studying and memorizing the strengths, weaknesses, and strategies of the superheroes he hopes to one day be like. He is obsessed with the subject of heroism and hopes to enroll into the top-ranked hero academy in the world, UA High, so that he can become the next great hero, just like the world's greatest living superhero, All Might, the symbol of peace. And his conviction is tested once more during a chance encounter with his heroic idol, who turns out to be much more than he appears to be, or maybe less so. In his most fragile state, the world's greatest living superhero speaks bluntly.
Some villains just can't be beaten without powers. So can you be a hero? Not without a quirk. It's not bad to have a dream, young man. Just make sure your dreams are attainable, realistic.
And just like the night of his diagnosis, just like the words from his mother, and just like the taunting, teasing of his classmates, if even the world's greatest hero thinks that being a hero is beyond his grasp, who is he to argue? All he will ever be at most is a burden on others.
Defenseless Izuku! The school's already crappy. You really want to embarrass it more by failing so hard?
In his head, Izuku Midoriya will never be anything more than weak little Deku. Or at least that's what he thought. At the sight of his classmate in danger, he moves without thinking. He's not doing this to undo a mistake. He's too scared to try to prove anything, and he's too weak to actually help his classmate. But that's not the point.
Kanchan, I couldn't just stand there and watch you die!
Deku, instinctively, couldn't allow himself to be a bystander. With great power comes great responsibility. Here's the thing about the message behind Spider-Man's famous origin story. It's not meant to be taken literally. Regardless if it's Peter who learns this lesson or if it's Uncle Ben who teaches him those words exactly, the message wasn't meant to be interpreted as only those with powers must show responsibility, and if one day you are given powers, it's your turn to do the right thing. That's not the meaning behind those words. If you have the capacity to do the right thing, you should do it.
I missed the part where that's my problem.
It doesn't matter that Deku was incapable of saving Bakugo. What matters is he tried, because the act of trying to rescue his friend is what inspires others. Whether it's the weakened All Might risking his own safety and living up to the mantle that was given to him, or whether it's a captivated audience won over by this quirkless underdog, Deku's actions are inspirational. Which is why after watching the 2 episodes abridging the life of this powerless, quirkless nobody, there is meaning behind his reward. Having the world's greatest superhero who previously told him that he could not be a hero without special powers, recognizes the young man's worth. He recognizes that the young man shares a trait that so few people have, and he is reminded of what it means to be a hero.
Young man, you too can become a hero.
Because the moral of the story is that anyone can be a hero. It doesn't matter if you're born with special powers, or with influence, or with natural talent, if there even is such a thing. What matters is that you try.
Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention that this is the story of how I became the world's greatest hero.
As far as I'm concerned, this is a perfect ending. Not for the series, but as a first impression. Because I have to watch the next episode. I have to know where this is going. How do you follow up on a story so inspiring? How do you expand upon a world where you can create an endless amount of new characters with various quirks and powers for someone to react off of? How do you advance on the story of a disadvantaged youth who has to work twice as hard just to keep up? And if they can catch up, how will they go beyond? Well, here's an idea. What if we gave that kid a superpower?
What?
Because the whole point of the story is that you don't need to be born with special talents to be a hero, so let's give the metaphorical Asperger kid a superpower so that he can be just like everybody else.
And when everyone's super, no one will be.
So now we have a very different reward and a very different moral to the story. Do the right thing, and you'll be rewarded. Do the right thing and you'll become great. And if you can't get into the school, job, career of your choice through your own hard work, then take a performance enhancer. Cheat. Because if the school is not going to let someone in who is quirkless, then I suppose Izuku Midoriya had no other choice but to cheat. Oh, except they are admitting in kids without quirks. They established in the first episode that a previous rule preventing kids without quirks from applying to UA High had been removed.
There's no way you're getting into the hero course without a quirk!
Well, actually, they got rid of that rule. I could be the first one.
Strange that that piece of detail would come up and the series doesn't take advantage of it with the audience surrogate character. It's almost like the pieces of the story were carefully laid out and then at the last second something changed, forcing the story to be worked around that change without completely tossing out everything that had been established. Apparently during the concept phase of My Hero Academia, there was a prototype version of Deku, here named Mikumo Akatani, who would have remained quirkless throughout the series. Instead, he would have been trained physically by All Might and relied more on gadgets, luck, and presumably the obsessive analytical skills he acquired through observing other heroes. That actually goes pretty well with what had been established in the final version of the first chapter. So what happened? According to Kohei Horikoshi, the creator of My Hero Academia, that was the route he was originally going to take, but his editor at the time insisted that Deku be given a quirk. In the Japanese print of the 6th volume of the manga, Horikoshi left additional details concerning the prototype version of the main character, along with a discussion that led to the concept of a quirk that could be given or transferred to another. This discussion not only led to the creation of One for All, which is the name of the quirk given to Deku, but it also facilitated the need to have Deku and All Might's relationship be given greater focus in the series. Now, in the defense of the editor, I kind of understand the urge to giving the protagonist a superpower. Writing for a visual medium demands for exciting visuals. So if there's an option between giving Deku a superpower and not giving him a superpower, obviously the superpower is the much more enticing offer. And I'm not going to lie, I really do like the relationship between All Might and Deku as it currently is, and it's possible that that relationship would have been completely different if One for All had not existed. But in giving Deku a superpower, you ignore the emotional hook of the series. We like Midoriya because we see ourselves in him. We like him because he is not someone we fantasize in being like. We like him because we would rather be All Might, not Deku.
Could I ever hope to be someone like you?
We can never be someone like All Might. But the moral of the story is that you don't have to be. It's okay that you can't be All Might. You don't have to be like anyone else to be a hero. You just have to be you. And this isn't the first time that Koei Horikoshi had written and drawn out that moral. In 2008, he made a one-shot manga called My Hero. Like My Hero Academia, it takes place in a modern contemporary setting and stars Jack Midoriya, a young salaryman who goes from one superhero showdown to another, hoping to sell gadgets to the heroes, but secretly yearns to become a hero himself. In this world, there's no X gene, there's no quirks, anyone can register to become a hero and fight monsters that show up to terrorize the town. Unfortunately for Jack Midoriya, ever since he was a child, he's been suffering from chronic anemia, which leaves him periodically weak and exhausted. Apparently he was born that way. In order to gain a hero's license, he has to pass the physical exam. And since he hasn't been able to pass the exam with his weak body, he's been having doubts about whether or not he can ever become a hero.
Sorry, kid, it's not gonna happen.
Already we're seeing a connection that the two Midoriyas share. Using Jack Midoriya's medical history, we can determine that the disability metaphor that hovers over Izuku Midoriya wasn't just a coincidence, but rather it was intentional and by thematic design. Now, I recognize that the comparison between Midoriyas isn't one-to-one, that Jack is an adult who clearly suffers from a medical condition, while Izuku as a teen merely has to live with being normal in a world full of supers. But you don't need to have read about Jack Midoriya to recognize the metaphor. Just watching the scene with the doctor's diagnosis and the mother's reaction to her scared child tells you that these aren't normal circumstances.
I'm sorry, Izuku. I wish things were different.
This is the reaction of an uncertain mother with an abnormal child. When she says, "I wish things were different," what she's actually saying, however unintentional, is, "I wish you were different."
Mom, that's not what I needed you to say. Couldn't you see? My world was crumbling.
The question that hovers over both incarnations of Midoriya remain the same despite their differences. Can someone like them, with all their faults, ever become a hero? With Izuku Midoriya, we know that the answer is yes, he can become a hero, so long as he goes through a significant transformation. Using All Might's own words, Izuku has the potential to becoming a hero, he just isn't one yet, which isn't really a positive message, but it works within the contextual framing of an ongoing serialized story. This series is about Izuku becoming the world's greatest hero.
So, it's that easy? I can become a hero just like that?
Of course not, kid. Not with that frail body of yours.
Huh?
As for Jack Midoriya, the moral of his story is framed around a single one-shot story. Near the end of the story, after Jack is nearly killed by a monster he was trying to fight, Jack's boss, the owner of the company responsible for the manufacturing and selling of heroic tools and gadgets, confronts him about using the company as a means to legally possess hero tools without having a hero license. Jack admits it, and even though he tried to game the system, Jack still can't seem to defeat any monsters in his condition, and he begins to weep. Why can't I become a hero? His boss confesses to him that she doesn't really know how to run her father's company. She just inherited it after her father passed away. Despite her best efforts, the company has been losing money and she knows that it's her fault. However, the only reason that the company has managed to stay afloat is the effort that Jack has put into his job. Being a hero isn't about catching criminals, fighting monsters, or performing feats of extraordinary abilities. People become heroes by helping others who are in trouble. And that's why Jack is her hero. Now that isn't the end of the story, but it is the moral of the story, which mirrors the moral to the first chapter of My Hero Academia. Both Midoriyas wanted to become heroes since they were kids, and both of them have to learn that even with their disabilities, they already were. And through their actions, the two are rewarded by being acknowledged for their heroism by their respective favorite heroes. To me, you're my hero. This is where Jack's story ends, but where Izuku's story begins. So we know what the original intentions for My Hero Academia was, based on the pilot with Jack Midoriya, and the author's admission about the concept phase for the series with Mikumo Akatane, before it was decided by the editor to change the final product that we have, giving us Izuku Midoriya. So my next question is, when was it decided that Deku was going to be given a superpower? Was it before the publication of the first chapter and therefore was always intended to be in the final product? Or was it a course correction made by the editor immediately after the publication of the first chapter? If it was made before publication and Deku was always intended to be given a superpower that can be transferred and inherited from another hero, how come there's no setup or foreshadowing for this to be the case? Why is there no line of dialogue given by All Might or a rumor being spread on the internet that hints about the existence of such a possibility? It wouldn't have to be a major focus of the first chapter, it would just have to be something planted for the audience to find, hidden within the dialogue of the first chapter that helps reinforce the idea that One for All was always going to be a factor, even though it's only name dropped in the second chapter. In the first chapter, why not have All Might say something during his speech to Deku about the dangers of crime fighting, and ever since I got this power, things have only gotten worse. Which is just small enough to be ambiguous as to whether he's talking about developing into his quirk, like the majority of people in the setting, or that he was speaking literal and was given a power. That could be a clue for the audience to follow, but something that Deku might not have noticed right away because his heroic idol was busy telling him the dangers of heroic life, capping it off with,
"So can you be a hero? Not without a quirk."
Which reminds me, if the decision to give Deku a superpower was made and finalized prior to the publication of the first chapter, and that Deku was going to be given a superpower from All Might, then doesn't that make All Might's speech about only those with quirks can become heroes hypocritical? It's revealed later on in the series that All Might was born without a quirk, and while that certainly does make All Might retroactively a hypocrite, the immediate takeaway of All Might having a superpower that he inherited is that even if All Might did have a quirk prior to the reveal and in earlier drafts of the series, whatever quirk he might have had would have been disconnected from his superhero work, because that's not the quirk that he's passing on to Deku. What I'm trying to say is, All Might having been revealed later on to not have been born with a quirk is not the thing that makes him a hypocrite, although it does. Rather, the reveal that he was given his superpowers at all do. Because telling someone they can't be a hero without their own supernatural powers, only to find out that the superpowers that made you a hero weren't natural, that makes you a hypocrite. Now, if the decision to give Deku a superpower was made after the publication of the first chapter, and One for All was invented immediately afterwards as a course correction for the series moving forward, under those specific circumstances, I'm actually kind of impressed. It still makes All Might retroactively a hypocrite, and I'm still upset about that, but I can hardly blame the author if his editor forced him into a no-win scenario. So the fact that he managed to salvage a consistently good series so far out of compromising his original intent is actually pretty amazing.
I'm not even mad. That's amazing.
So in this scenario, instead of focusing on making suggestions to a chapter in the manga that had solid intent, but had to accommodate for executive meddling, instead I'm going to focus on the animated adaptation. How come the studio behind the anime didn't add elements of foreshadowing? You know what's crazy? The first manga chapter of Full Metal Alchemist is a little over 50 pages long, ends on a cliffhanger, and is padded out with new material in the animated adaptation. The first manga chapter of My Hero Academia is over 50 pages long, tells the complete story, and is split into 2 episodes of its animated adaptation with virtually no padding. And somehow, the creative team behind the anime was able to find a logical endpoint halfway into the story to give the anime much more breathing room to the benefit of the story they were trying to retell. That's insane. Normally what I would expect to see in an animated adaptation would be elements or characters from later chapters incorporated into episodes based on earlier chapters to help pad out a 20-minute runtime and maybe establish those characters early on, especially if the continuity of the story suggests that our heroes are already familiar with these new characters who appear in later chapters of the manga. It plays with continuity and is a bit of a retcon, but it's usually harmless. It takes 2 whole episodes to tell the first chapter of My Hero Academia, and as far as I can tell, does not incorporate anything from later chapters. And while I'm pretty hesitant to retroactively change anything about the first 2 episodes, because, as a reminder, I really do love the first 2 episodes. It's strange to me that the creative team behind the anime did not take advantage of knowing the direction of the series and making adjustments to help establish things sooner. If I had to guess, I would say that the reveal that All Might's power could be bestowed upon another, choosing Deku as a successor to his powers, was supposed to land as both a surprise and as a joke.
I deem you worthy of my power. My quirk is yours to inherit.
Because it's very easy to forget, even though this show really got to me with its metaphor and themes, that it is also a very silly show. And maybe the creative team behind the anime did not want to ruin the punchline by adding foreshadowing, opting instead to change nothing. But when the funny surprise for the main character with no powers is that he's going to be given the best superpower, it's not really funny. It's less of a punchline and more like a sucker punch. Because if this was intended to be played as a gag, then that means that all the drama surrounding Deku as a born minority who was bullied for being different, yet finds the courage to reach out and try to save his friend who is also his bully, all of that was part of the joke. Which is kind of offensive, isn't it? And I think this narrative whiplash is the main reason why I would like to believe that the author's hand was forced to make this change after the publication of the first chapter. Because then I can say in his defense that there was nothing that could have been done to add or change anything about the first chapter to properly prepare for the creation of One for All, if the manga was already printed out in that week's issue of Shonen Jump. The series has already begun printing, he's committed to writing it, and he has to make this one change to move forward, and that his hands were tied. But as far as I can tell, there is one piece of evidence that might suggest that One for All was always going to be in the series prior to the publication of the first chapter. And that evidence lies within Deku's real name. Now, as I'm not an expert in Japanese kanji, I don't really want to dwell on this for very long, and I'm more than likely going to get something wrong, so apologies in advance. Apparently within the Japanese kanji of Izuku Midoriya's name, the character Ku, as in Izuku, meaning forever or a long time, shares the exact same pronunciation as the Japanese word for the number 9. Izuku also happens to be the 9th inheritor of One for All, which suggests that Izuku was named as he was in Chapter 1 explicitly because he was going to be the 9th something. This evidence is further supported by the reveal that All Might's real name, Toshinori Yagi, contains the kanji for the number 8, which makes sense as he is the previous and 8th inheritor of One for All. However, in the case of All Might, as far as I can tell, his true name isn't revealed until much later after the introduction to the series. So for all intents and purposes, his name was, for a while at least, just All Might. If One For All was created after the publication of the first chapter, then All Might's real name would probably have been made up later during the production of the series as opposed to during the planning stages. This could be the reason that All Might explicitly has a numeric kanji within his name, as opposed to Izuku, who only shares a coincidental pronunciation to a number in his name rather than a direct numerical kanji. But let's say for the sake of argument that the pronunciation of Izuku's name wasn't a coincidence, that Izuku was explicitly given a name that shares the pronunciation for the number 9 because Izuku Midoriya was destined prior to the release of the first chapter to be the 9th inheritor of One For All. Here's the thing, the pronunciation of Izuku's name is not used as a plot device within the first chapter. Even if it's not a coincidence, at best it's trivia. And trivia is not the same thing as exposition, not unless it's brought up and explained within the work of fiction. Trivia is not a shortcut for good storytelling. You know what is good storytelling? Setting up a superhero world where all the adult heroes are situational opportunists and all the kids with flashy powers who aspire to be just like them fail to recognize their own behavior for the less fortunate because they only see the title of hero as an easy job to become rich and famous. And when a villain shows up with an advantageous quirk over the heroes, the adult heroes are willing to risk the life of a captive if it means waiting for some other costumed hero with a quirk that's better suited to fighting the villains. But being a hero isn't about playing a game of elemental rock, paper, scissors. This isn't Pokemon. Being a hero is about helping others and taking risks. That's one other reason why it's so powerful to watch Deku, the least powerful person established in the canon thus far, jump into the fire to save someone who's been nothing but an asshole to him, because it's the payoff to everything that's been established previously.
I told you the traits that make a great champion, but I see now I wasn't living up to my own ideal! Pros are always risking their lives! That's the true test of a hero!
So going back to the question of when was the decision made to give Deku a superpower, and the possibility that the answer is before the completion of the first chapter, the only other explanation that I can think of as to why this version of this story exists without leaving any foreshadowing is that Kohei Horikoshi wanted to remake his short story as close to the original as possible, updating the moral of that story and then compromising the rest of the series by following the advice of his editor, because then at least he got to rewrite the story he wanted to tell.
There are stories about every hero, how they became great. Most have one thing in common. Their bodies moved before they had a chance to think. Almost on their own.
I'm not super satisfied with that explanation, but I do feel like it's a possibility. Now, the main reason I wanted to talk about this was because I wanted to share my love for the first 2 episodes of My Hero Academia, vent over the narrative whiplash that followed it, and offer a couple of defenses as to why I think that whiplash might have happened. It's not that I think My Hero Academia had become a terrible show by the 3rd episode. I'm still watching it, it's just that the first 2 episodes were offering something that I didn't get to see very often, and I was disappointed that the metaphor behind this series seemed to have been left behind. And I hope I've been able to convey the reason why I haven't been talking about what exactly Deku's superpower is, because I don't think it matters what power he has. He could have been given the power to turn trash into trees, or seemingly a really dumb superpower, but it wouldn't matter because giving him a superpower completely negates the metaphor behind Deku's character. You have cured him of his handicap. Also, even if Deku's powers are taken away from him in a future chapter, regardless if it's temporary or permanently, it still doesn't matter because by giving Deku a superpower before his entrance exams into the Hero Academy, you are suggesting that it would have been impossible for Deku, or anyone else like him, to ever get into that school without a quirk. By giving him a superpower, you have metaphorically given Deku a performance enhancer. You have turned the hero of the story into a cheater.
What did you do to pass the exam? You must have cheated somehow, right?
But for what it's worth, yes. Using All Might's gift, Deku is given unbelievable super strength that breaks his own bones every time he uses it throughout the first season and half of the second season. Not only does this lead to some heart-wrenching drama, it's also gut-busting hilarious, which matches the overall tone of the series. Because of how dangerous this quirk is to his body, Deku has to learn to keep his power in reserve to stay in commission, which leads to him channeling his power through his digits, providing the audience a means of keeping track of his ammunition. Coincidentally, it also means that Deku cannot solve all his problems with casually using his superpower, and often abstains from using it at all. So if we were to apply broad strokes, it's pretty convincing that the first couple of arcs were designed with a powerless Deku in mind. I say broad strokes because it's clear that the scope of certain scenarios were designed to show off Deku's superpower, the 0 point robot specifically, but the gag ending of Deku getting 0 combat points and seemingly failing the entrance exam still works with a powerless Deku. Deku blowing a hole through the building during his combat exercise with Bakugo is still feasibly possible if Deku redirects Bakugo's blast skyward, allowing the subsequent events to still transpire. Outside of the specific scenario of creating a whirlpool during the rescue exercise, which would have probably just played out completely differently, the scene is mostly about Deku analyzing the quirks of his classmates, giving them directions and combining their powers to escape. Deku getting first place and earning 1 million points from the foot race is both cathartic and hilarious precisely because he didn't use any powers to win. I really like My Hero Academia and I will continue to watch and support it, but just because I like it, it doesn't mean that I'm going to ignore the problems that I have with it, especially if those problems are rooted into luring me into a falsely advertised product. Just because I like Bakugo's insane jealousy of Midoriya's sudden power-up, or Deku's relationship with All Might, or some of the dramatic turns that only comes from an outsider who appreciates the skills and abilities of others because he himself wasn't born with any, doesn't mean I should ignore what was an excellently executed lie. To restate what I had said earlier, we like Midoriya because we see ourselves in him. We like him because he is not someone we fantasize in being like. We like him because we would rather be All Might and not Deku. But the moral of the story is that you don't have to be. It's okay that you can't be All Might. You don't have to be like anyone else to be a hero. You just have to be you. And when you give Deku a superpower, you are making him become All Might.